Hey guys, how are you going? It's VaulSC here. Hope your week is really going well. Today I'm going to talk about a game of infiNity played between the O12 and the Shasvastii, the classic wildfire matchup. And it's going to be on the mission Quadrant Control. I don't particularly like Quadrant Control, and I say this about a lot of ITS missions, it's true, but I like this one even less than the average ITS mission, because it's one of those games where scoring is done at the end of every game round, which means that the player going second has even more of an advantage than usual, but we'll talk about that a bit more. The link in the video description should take you to the Asteroid Blues page if you're into that kind of thing, for clicking on bat reps if you want. Now, the game itself, to give you some background with it, I'm playing against a friend of mine who's just started playing infiNity with us in our local meta, and he's come over from other systems, so this is a newer player. I do want to say that as you're watching this bat rep, you may see some mistakes made by my opponent based on the fact that he's unfamiliar with the game and the system and, what his opponent's models do. So, don't be too quick to sort of criticize that. We all sort of have to get into the game and develop ourselves. But on the other hand, he makes some really good plays as well that you wouldn't really expect from a beginner player, which ends up making it very interesting. In combination with that, he does also make the very good decision during this game to take the second turn, which is very powerful, and I'll continue to talk about that as a theme throughout the bat rep. But I just want to raise this for anybody sort of who may be watching this and going, oh, well, why will you post the bat rep again if it's against somebody who's less experienced? Well, it turns out to be a very close game, an interesting game that we can all learn from, and it turns out to be quite action-packed as well. So I think you guys will actually enjoy this bat rep, despite that little bit of context. But really enjoyed playing against this guy, great opponent, and hopefully we'll have a lot of games against his Shasvastii on the channel in future. Alright, let's quickly talk about the mission, then we'll go into the lists, then we'll go into the play-by-play of the game itself. So here's my classic terrain setup that you guys have seen many times before on the YouTube channel. Let's make this nice and small. Quadrant Control is an old classic. It's been in the ITS seasons for a very long time, and it basically divides the table up into 4 rectangles like this. And at the end of every game round, that's when player 1 has had 1 turn and player 2 has had 1 turn. You count the number of points in each zone. So maybe I've got 56 in this zone and you've got 77 in that zone. And maybe I've got 5 in this zone and you've got nothing. And maybe I've got 15 in this zone and you've got 20. And maybe I've got nothing in this zone and you've got nothing in that zone. Well, what would happen is that you would have more in that zone, so we tick that one for you. You've got nothing in that one, you've got more in this one, and nobody's got this one either. So it counts as like nothing, really. So what we do there is we say, well, the player who has these 2 quadrants has more quadrants than the other player, so they get some objective points. And you do that 3 times during the game. Once after the first game round, second after the second game round, and then after the third game round when the game ends. But the thing is, you get 2 entire objective points each time you do that. And you get a further +1 objective point if your data tracker was in one of the zones you dominate. So for example, your data tracker is over here, and you're the player that grabbed this zone and this zone. You'd end up getting 3 points for that game around. And if you do a little bit of math and thinking about the context of this, you'll see that it's very easy to just get a really big lead with this kind of scoring pattern. It is possible to pick up 1 point from a classified, but most of it really is just coming down to defending the 2 quadrants closer to you and making a push, at the end of the game round for one of your opponent's quadrants, or just shooting what they've got in there. So it's a really bad mission, because if you do not have that second turn, you're going to be leaving models out in the midfield for your opponent to shoot. They can see which of your quadrants is the weaker one and devote their resources to that, and it's very easy for them to overtake that. If you are having to play with the first turn, your goal really is to put on so much pressure on your opponent that they're really on the back foot. You're setting up arrows in the midfields, and you've got mines, crazy koalas hacking out there, and you're gutting the auto pull right from the get-go, so that in the later phase of the game, turns 2 and 3, they can't really recapture the area from you. And that's how you'd go about it if you are taking first turn for whatever reason. Don't love the mission, though. Okay, let's talk about my O12 list for this game. I have actually recreated it because I saved over it, so this may not be the exact list. But we are running Hippolyta because I've spent a fair bit of time painting her. I brushed her up for a painting competition, and I'm really curious about how well the model plays out in the midfield. I've had one game with her so far, which again was a bit of a one-sided game, so I didn't really get to see much of her situational value. But the argument goes that the Varangian guards just do such a good job at her role in the midfield of tying things up and solving problems out in the Midlands that maybe Hippolyta isn't really needed. And I think that's quite a compelling and moving argument. And if I was to play O12 seriously in a lot of ITS events, maybe I'd leave her at home for that reason. However, there's a few things that she can do that they can't. So Varangians kind of trade with things using Berserk to win in close combat, whereas Hippolyta can just outright beat you in close combat, and she does a lot more damage with the explosive close combat weapons. So it's not a matter of just tying up the enemy avatar or Sphinx in the middle of the table. You'd actually destroy it with Hippolyta, and that's more than can be said about the Varangians a lot of the time. Also, she has Eclipse grenades instead of just regular smoke, so the Varangians can block off a lot of stuff, but against any MSV2, Hippolyta is better in that regard. And then for midfield shooting, she's got Breaker Rifle, BS-13, and ODD, whereas the Varangians have just got BS-10 SMG, so she's much better at the shooting side of the midfield. Then, of course, she's got a little bit more resilience than they do. She's got NWI instead of Dogged, and then the mobility, super jump. She's also impetuous. And depending on your table, she may or may not be able to get into some positions where she can find angles to shoot, get into close combat with models that weren't expecting it. And your Varangians just can't do that. So I'm keen to play test her a little bit. Syria's still in there, same profile as always. Starting to get a little bit bored of these guys and starting to question whether they are the best choice. I am going to write a list with a Beta Trooper instead and see how that goes, but for now we're running the Sirius. Dakini HMG just because it's so points cost efficient with the Kappa Hacker in the background there. All of the cheerleaders, of course, bots, Doctor to help out, Delta still running with the boarding shotgun Panzerfaust. I'm a big believer in this profile. I just want to test it and test it and test it and keep trying it. Gangbuster Killer Hacker, you'd really want 2 of these in your list, but I've only got 1 this time around. I'm working on it, guys. I'm pretty sure I can write better O12 lists than this. This is mostly to test Hippolyta, to be honest. Upsilon, we're finally swapping out the sniper for the HMG, and I've got a good feeling about this swap, because with the sniper, all you can really do is just tank hits and ARO a lot of the time, and that's not really what you want to be doing when you're playing infiNity, whereas the HMG is much more active and aggressive, and even though he's low speed, you can deploy him out a little bit with forward deployment level 1, and hopefully find some good angles if the table is right. Alpha Lieutenant, at one point I was experimenting with the lesser Kappa Lieutenant, but I really like Strategos level 2, and I really like having that additional order from Strategos level 1. So this is what we are playing with today, and here's what we're up against. It's a Sphinx list. Sphinx, very, very powerful tag, only became more powerful due to the ridiculous choice of Corvus Belli to add tactical awareness to it without adjusting its points cost. Think about the Sphinx as its best when you are playing in a very committed, aggressive way. It's great that it can't be destroyed in your first turn if you're just keeping it in hidden deployment, unless they've got a very long-range sensor. So it's quite easy to get value out of, but that one game where it fails to get the value, you're usually really at a big disadvantage. Specular Killer Mine Layer, again, this is a list that screams first turn. You want to get value out of the Speculo going first. It turns out to be the case that he does not go first, so a couple of these things are a little bit diminished. Caliban, MSV1, Spitfire. I'm going to talk about this profile more in future videos. I'm a big fan of it. A lot of people aren't. It's a big 40-point unit. I don't really agree with it so much being useful in this particular list because you need things to back up the Sphinx, and the Sphinx does the same job that Caliban is generally going to do. So I think that there are other ways that you can buff this list, possibly with Noctifers, or maybe a bigger, stronger Link team, for example. Caliban maybe not the best fit. He did run a Nox Hacker and Paramedic. I'm not too sure if he did take the Forward Observer. I think that was in there. I know he had 3 Nox Troopers. I'm just not sure what the third one was. I think Forward Observer for the whole liaison thing that may not have been applicable in this scenario. But yeah, that's the only question mark for this list. There was a mentor, great way of keeping your lieutenant alive. A couple of Echidrons, really essential in Sphinx lists. Shrouded Mine Layer, nothing wrong with that guy. So let's go and talk about the game now and see how it went. Again, my opponent winning the dice roll, going straight for second turn, despite the fact that the Sphinx cries out for going first and the Specular cries out for going first. Second turn is still such a powerful way to win this kind of mission with this kind of list, so already feeling like I'm on the back foot. He's starting out by deploying a Specular Killer in the midfield and putting a mine closer towards where my deployment zone is. So my deployment zone is just south of that trailer. Now this is maybe not the best mine placement, just because it's so easy for me to see where it is. He's deploying before I am, and there are a lot of ways that I can actually clear this mine out. And then leaving the Specular in the midfield, it's possible for me to move up, discover him, and kill him. So I think a better deployment would have been on top of one of the buildings, or just trying to roll for it and get him into my back line somewhere where he's really annoying and would be hard to discover. Or just keeping him back and using him perpetually just to keep his points in one zone. In fact, that's a really good use of an impersonator, is just to deploy it in one of the 4 quadrants, preferably one of your opponent's quadrants, and on top of a building where it's really hard to get to. And that way you've got 30 or 40 points just sitting in that zone for the entire game, which puts so much pressure on your opponent to always keep enough points there. Imagine, you've got your Specular in one of their quadrants, and you know that they've got 30 or 40 points to keep there, and then when it comes back to you, they've only just tipped the scales by putting a couple of cheerleaders into that zone. Well, all you need to do is just send one model over there, and you've got the win. You've got an extra 2 objective points that they can never get. Very, very powerful play, but not so much the case with this one here. Looking at his right-hand flank, there's the Shrouded Mine Layer. Again, it seems a bit weird from just place them both out in the open and both close together like that. That tells me what they are, so I can instantly sort of see what I'm dealing with there, and I know that I could just move around the corner, trigger the mine, and potentially deal with the Shrouded out in the open. A better way to have done this, I feel, would have been to put them both behind the crate, or put one of them behind the crate, one of them up on the stairs, so it's not too clear from me, what's what. It would have been pretty guessable, but just not 100% clear. Echidron around this side, plus the paramedic prone on top of the building. If we take a closer look towards the mid zone of the deployment, you have the paramedic here. Echidron that we were just talking about, the mine layer and friender over this side. This guy back here, I believe, is his hacker. That's the Caliban, not deploying too far out. There's the mentor behind this box. This is an ambush camo marker, nothing to see there. We saw the Specular out the midfield with its mine towards my deployment zone. This is another Echidron at the back. This is what I think is the Nox Forward Observer, although it may have been a different kind of Nox. If I go over to the side here, so that's the midfield. We know that the Sphinx is in hidden deployment. It's actually around here to the bottom of where the photo is, towards that side. My deployment, to follow up from that, noting that I'm deploying second and going first, so there's that double-edged advantage. Serious team out in the midfield. Again, there is a very small possibility that he's got his Sphinx in a position where he can ARO me right from the get-go, and just in case he does that, I'm trying to be at least a little bit conservative with where I'm deploying. I also don't want to get into a situation where I start moving out something in Group 1, then have to spend a lot of orders on something else in Group 1 because there's been a hidden deployment reveal, and then maybe not get left enough orders to reposition my out-of-position model that I started moving from Group 1. Anyway, flashball spot on the left, Varangian Guard, Dakini HMG, Minesweeper. This is the left-hand flank, 4012. Through to the middle, another Minesweeper at the back. Oh, we just talked about that, actually. This is the, I believe, the Hacker. Varangian's just hanging out around here. I know that they're going to be impetuousing towards his line, but after looking at this list, it's likely there's a Sphinx. In fact, it's pretty much guaranteed there's a Sphinx. And if they bait out a Sphinx, that's a huge win for me. Like, if the Sphinx fires from hidden deployment, they just throw a smoke down. If they get hit and die, it doesn't matter. And then I can actually spend my first turn eliminating that Sphinx, and that will put me in a massive, massive lead. Note the positioning of the Gangbuster right here behind the truck. That allows me to put one Crazy Koala, Mad Trap there, the other one over here. The plan is actually to move out with him initially, and the Mad Trap will go in the way of the mine, and the mine will detonate. I had a read of the rules, and it says that if you move your Mad Trap, it will provoke AROs from enemy models, so I don't see why that wouldn't set the mine off. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the strategy here. The mad traps are still going to be very important to try and deter a speculo and a sphinx and so forth, but it's quite a good way of clearing out the mine by just using one of them for that purpose. Above here, we've got Upsilon and the Doctor next to him. They're both going to stay prone for a while. Again, I'm kind of worried that a Sphinx might scream up the flank here later in the game. Just climb the building, shoot them both, and then just wreck everything. So that is a bit of a problem, but hopefully the Mad Trap will help. Hopefully the repeaters around here with my hacker will help deter that. Having warbands up in the midfield will maybe help as well. You can see my HVT on the side. These barricades indicate the side of the table. That's not actually part of the terrain. Reserve Trooper Hippolyta is just coming down here on top of the building next to the hacker. She will be able to use her Impetuous to jump off. So initially the Varangians will move up, possibly throwing smoke. If no hidden deployment shows up, Hippolyta jumps out. If the Sphinx was to arrow against Hippolyta, well, it can only do a maximum of 1 wound to her. She's got NWI, and she's more likely to actually beat him in that close combat roll anyway, because that face-to-face roll, because the Spitfire versus ODD is not going to be very good against just a plain old Eclipse grenade straight to the feet, right? My lieutenant is the other reserve trooper. Note that I have 2 reserve troopers because of Strategos level 2, provided by this very person here, represented by a kappa on a little acrylic disc, just to show that it's a silhouette for big bulky base with guard level 3 or whatever it's got, level 4, can't quite remember. What does it have? I can't even remember. Guard level 4. I know that's quite powerful once you get into close combat. Okay, so my opponent is choosing his Nox Trooper Hacker as the data tracker, and I'm choosing Hippolyta as my data tracker. Data trackers, again, really important, because if one player goes up 2-0, it's going to be really hard to catch up on that later in the game. What may happen is that initially, the player with first turn does a little bit of damage, and then the player with second turn counteracts and makes a bit of a comeback, goes up 2-0 on the board. Then towards the mid games, things start swinging back, and it becomes a draw with both players holding 2 zones each. And then in the finale, the player with first turn does so much damage by then that the other player can't recover, and it's a 2-0, bringing it back to square, right? And that's where having data trackers in the zones during that time would have made the difference. So Impetuous now, all the Varangians moving out one by one, not provoking any arrows from our friendly Sphinx and hidden deployment. So then we can start getting moving with the Sirius team. Also, Hippolyta jumping off the bridge, again using super jump to land squarely on the ground. And she will also be able to move up and around over to here. Again, not worried about the Sphinx showing up. He could technically have a Noctifer, but given the models he's put on the table, I think that's less likely. All of the camo markers would really have to be very expensive models for him to make up the deficit, considering he's showing 2 Echidrons and 3 Nox Troopers and 1 Speculo. So you can kind of do the math. Alrighty, so a Sirius bot moving around. You can see the target, right? I'm initially going to go for this pair of camo markers. That will allow me to remove 1 Shrouded and hopefully position the Sirius team in his quadrant over here, so that in his follow-up turn, he's going to have to be clearing me out of one of his quadrants and then going after one of my quadrants to secure that 2-0 leg up that he needs. So that's the plan. Moving initially around here, and I'm getting the Sirius spot to a point where it's in range of both these camo markers. That's going to detonate a mine and tell me which one is the mine. The other one doesn't react. So what I'm able to do here is try and dodge. The bot somehow manages to survive the mine with a past armor save. So I can then attempt a intuitive attack with the heavy riot stopper, which I believe fails. And then I can move around the side here as he attempts the dodge. Note that after declaring the intuitive attack, I believe he dodges that and succeeds, but then he's revealed himself, so the Sirius spot comes around the side, and now he has to either dodge the riot stopper or shoot back against the Red Fury, and of course this is going to destroy the Shrouded pretty comfortably. Hippolyta also moving through the middle of the board, because what's happened here is that in response, my opponent, although we've seen him make some mistakes so far, quite cleverly opts to place a mine on the table, which is a great play. And I'm finding that this keeps happening to my Sirius team, and maybe a reason for me to finally stop using them, because the mine is really problematic. By placing the mine right here, he can actually detonate it on both of them when they next move. So I have to destroy the mine before provoking it, otherwise this team, their days may be numbered. So what's happening now is I'm spending orders on Hippolyta, moving to the midfield. She can try for the discover and then the shoot with the breaker rifle onto the mine, which I think she manages to do eventually. Moves around here, goes for the Discover. Yep, there she is, just discovering it and shooting it from long range with the breaker rifle. In fact, I think she did get into the correct range band. Note that there is also a model here. That's the Caliban. He's opting wisely not to reveal his Caliban because it won't do a very good job killing Hippolyta, and Hippolyta may just wreck him with the breaker rifle anyway. So wise moves. We're seeing some mistakes. New player, you expect that, but you're also seeing some good plays as well, which we want to commend him for. So then Hippolyta jumping up on top of this building and then going prone in the corner, and I'm setting her up in a position where hopefully she can stand in one of the zones. I actually ended up getting that wrong, the middle of the table somewhere through here, so she's actually in one of my zones, which actually is okay because the data tracker is going to give me an extra point there if she lives, and if my opponent doesn't move a big fat model into that area. So that +1 point for data tracker is going to be really crucial, but she also has to survive. Thinking about this and putting her prone right here, I'm also moving around with some support. Now here's the thought. Her facing is towards this direction, where my opponent sort of got most of his concentration of troops. I'm moving the serious team around here, so she's on the stairs and the bot's behind this crate, giving it, a bit of total cover. And I've also got my ranging guard around here. The thinking is that if the Sphinx just comes up the side here and attacks her from here, she can start dodging or throwing an Eclipse grenade or maybe engaging, that kind of thing. But if it comes around the back, it might be able to shoot Hippolyta in the back because it moves with stealth because it's a marker. But if it does come around the back, I can at least defend Hippolyta with the position of these two models here and the repeater provided by the Sirius bot. So hopefully I've done enough to make it at least difficult or deter him for just wiping a Hippolyta up with the Sphinx straight away. If he does that successfully, mind you, he'll probably go up 2-0 in terms of the zones. He may move his own data tracker into one of his zones. And with Hippolyta dying, I can't gain a point from my my data tracker, scoring ability. You can see how not having second turn is so terrible in this mission unless you're able to do crippling damage with your Alpha Strike. And against a faction that can put a lot of stuff into Marcus State, how do you even achieve that? Continuing with my push, because as I've mentioned, this is so important to do damage and gut the auto pull. So putting up control jump from group 2, landing my Delta behind this crate, also with group 2, and this will allow me to go after this Ichthydron here. Now I keep talking about my Delta with Panzerfaust shotgun. I still continue to fail to run into optimal situations for it. My last game with him, I think that I tried to land in front of a Volunteers Link team, but scattered, but that's not really my fault. But landing here anyway, landing successfully, then I can pull out and fire the boarding shotgun at 2 shots against this model, but it's going to have flash pulse, so unfortunately the Delta completely whiffs that as it moves around to attack the Ichthydron and gets blinded and just huddles back and behind the crate. That's not terrible though, because it does still give me a model in his deployment zone, which I can move out later into that quadrant, and I will start contributing an order to group 2 for the rest of the game, so it could be worse. So there is its final position back behind this white crate. Also moving around with some bots. What I'm going to do here is move this Flash Pulse bot over to here to try and start discovering his Speculo. Also in his turn, when he starts moving the Speculo out, I can declare Discover. I don't mind if I lose a Flash Pulse bot. It also puts a repeater up here, just in case the Sphinx ends up coming through this building or over it or around it in some way, shape or form. Having that repeater there will be quite important from this right-hand flank. So there is its position here. Doesn't unfortunately manage to discover the Speculo, but is in a position that is helpful. So there you go there. You can actually see it where the Varangian Guard is covering the extreme right-hand flank. Got this repeater in position. The Speculo's behind this, under this building somewhere here. And I've got a few things covering off this area. If the Speculo reveals, it will also be targeted by the Mad Trap's perimeter boost as well. So I think I've got some defense at least from that. Okay, going to my opponent for Shasvastii turn 1. He's starting off with some coordinated orders which are now moving his Nox troopers around a little bit and also moving the Speculo back up and around to the stairs closer to his deployment zone. Also moving his Ichthydron closer to my my Delta here. This does cause the Sirius Trooper to fire with his Red Fury, which I'd pre-planned. Unfortunately, Sirius Trooper doesn't manage to achieve that. Delta does fail to dodge, which is unlucky, but then passes both armor saves. So good luck, bad luck kind of cancels out, and we're left with all troopers surviving at this point. Sphinx now revealing. Note that my opponent is simply using the model as the marker, so this Sphinx is still in marker state. Please don't forget that. I'll tell you when it comes out of marker state, but he's just doing that rather than plonking a big great marker on the table, which is fine by me. At least the pictures look nicer. So this is where he began, far onto the left-hand flank for Shasvastii, and now moving forwards. So I just want to point out where things are in relation. He's moving from this side of the table. The Speculo has moved up and around here onto this bridge. Hippolyta is on this building over there. Alright, he's also done some coordinated mortars, shifting his Nox. He's also moved out his Caliban over to here. We do know there's a Delta behind this building here. We know that there's a Varangian and Sirius behind this area here. So that's what's happening. In the next few orders, he's going to be sending his Sphinx over here across the bridge towards Hippolyta. So the showdown. Who will win? Now, as the Speculo Killer moves up closer to the Hippolyta's position, we do see what I would consider to be a minor mistake by my opponent. And again, you know, he's making some very good plays and some not so good plays, but, you know, a newer player, and we've got to forgive that. Putting the mine down on the bridge, and this is not even in range of Hippolyta, it's just really just to cause her trouble if she does walk down the path. And to be honest, I don't really like that play. It reveals the Speculo at a point where it could potentially get shot. You have to spend a whole order going back into marker state to re-impersonate. And if you really wanted to try for the trade, the Speculo could even go over there and fight Hippolyta, because the Speculo would actually be at an advantage if we're factoring in surprise attack. And then Hippolyta would you know, stand a good chance of being wiped out. An even better play, though, is just to keep the Speculo in impersonation state towards the middle of the table, where it can actually put points towards zones and let the Sphinx hog all of the orders and move over. Ikadron having another go at destroying the Delta, and unfortunately not managing to succeed. This time the Delta passes its dodge check, I believe, so Flame is you know, not effective. Again, if you want to play a Sphinx well, I believe you do have to be a bit more committal. You need to have to spend the whole order pool on it in a lot of cases to get the jobs done with it. You don't want your Sphinx to run out of orders and be in a bad position. So activating the Ikadron again, probably not the best choice. But we do have the Sphinx coming in, now moving up to the point where you can see where the mine and the Speculo is. What the Sphinx is going to be doing is just jumping over that, or climbing over it, and then moving into the alleyway through here, going down the walkway and heading towards Hippolyta. As it does so, Sphinx is potentially being discovered by Varangian guards who are throwing discover checks at it and actually succeeding, rolling a 1 in some case to actually reveal it. So then the Sphinx makes the play by moving over close enough to get line of sight to Hippolyta. Now let's talk about this. He's come from the angle where Hippolyta is expecting, so he is in line of sight. He's not in repeater range. He's nowhere near the Sirius team or the Varangian guard. Hippolyta can respond in the following ways. She can do a regular dodge, and she can move from that with Kinematica. She could attempt an engage, or she can attempt an eclipse grenade, or she could even fire a breaker rifle if she was stupid, but she's not. Depending on what she does, the Sphinx is either going to fire both heavy flamers, or it's going to fire its Spitfire at close range at -6 to hit because of ODD, hitting on 8s on 4 dice. Let's get technical. Now, a lot of you guys are not going to like this, but the rules apparently say that if you move as an active turn model, and you don't come into base-to-base contact with your enemy model at AROs, and if Hippolyta declares an engage here, thanks to her level of Kinematica, which allows her to engage from further away, the Sphinx is then allowed to declare a close combat attack. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you read the rules for engage, it actually mentions what happens if the Sphinx chooses a close combat attack in that particular scenario, implying that it is possible. And for that reason, there's a consensus in the community that that is allowed. Now, a lot of you guys might not be happy with that, and I'm not happy with it either. I personally don't think that you should be allowed to do that. I feel like Corvus Belli have just poorly worded the rule, and what they're trying to allow for is a situation where the Sphinx walks into base contact with Hippolyta. Hippolyta declares an engage for some reason, even though she's already now in base contact with him, because an engage would technically still be legal, and then the Sphinx can make a close combat attack, and if he wins, Hippolyta is pushed out of close combat. In a corner case, that might be something a person may do if they would rather, use the engage for dodge purposes rather than disengaging from close combat. They still want to use their Fizz value to engage you, but they don't want to be set apart from you at the end of that. Hippolyta would never do that because she is much better at just whacking you with her sword. Anyway, I explained this to my opponent. I said, look, I'm not happy about it, but the consensus in the community is on that ruling that you would be allowed to make a close combat attack if Hippolyta engages. And because the Sphinx is quite good in close combat and he's got an explosive close combat weapon, that would be the way to go. I'm still declaring an engage from Hippolyta here because if I don't, then what's going to happen is he's just going to flame me, right? If I do a regular dodge, the Sphinx will keep shooting at me, which I don't want. Looking back at it, dodging might have still been okay because the Sphinx only has like 1 or 2 orders left. I think he's got 2 orders left after this, or maybe 1. But that makes a real difference. If you just dodge, he's just going to keep shooting you until the end of time, so that's not great. However, if you engage and get lucky, then not only do you tie him up, but you're guaranteed to kill him next turn, which is a huge swing. So it's a bit of a risk taken here. Anyway, I declare the engage. My opponent, for whatever reason, decides not to declare the close combat attack that he's entitled to and goes for the shot. I think feeling with 4 dice, he was hoping for a crit or at least beat me or something like that. And the result of that face-to-face roll is that Hippolyta manages to roll like a 10 and win it. And the Sphinx doesn't beat her in that face-to-face roll. And Hippolyta is then placed in close combat with the Sphinx. And your opponent can place the model anywhere at once. So that's where she ends up. So interesting, isn't it? Please note that despite some mistakes in my opponent's deployment and maybe his army list and where he moves things, that could very well have ended in Hippolyta's death, which would probably have led to a very decisive victory for Shasvastii. Again, partly because of the matchup, partly because of the dice rolls, but very much to do with the scenario as well. My opponent still has orders left though. And sensing desperation here, because he knows that Hippolyta is going to absolutely wreck that Sphinx in close combat, most likely, the Speculo attempts to fire its combi rifle into close combat, which is pretty bad, because it's a total of minus 12 after the +3 to range. So it goes up to BS 15, I think, then minus 12 from camo and ODD and close combat. And ends up whiffing the shots, basically doing no damage to the Sphinx. And the turn ends, unfortunately, after, I think, something repositioned over here. I'm not quite sure what ended up happening. I think the Mentor moved out into the zone. And unfortunately for him, he didn't even quite move the data tracker out into the right zone. So that's quite a crucial mistake too. And we'll see the workings of that later. So once the game round ends, we're left in a position where my opponent goes up 2 points because he's got the Sphinx in my zone here that Hippolyta was trying to control. And Hippolyta, even though she's the data tracker, she's not dominating that zone, so no bonus points. So the score now becomes 2-0 to Shasvastii. No, very importantly, it could have been 3-0 to Shasvastii had he just spent an extra order getting his data tracker into his zone. I can feel from though because if he puts the data tracker in the wrong spot, it could also be eliminated and cost him later on. So there is that. Of course, though, we... by the way, the Speculo had moved prone as part of coordinated order somewhere, so it is tucked away. Of course, what happens, though, is that it now becomes my turn. O12 begins. Impetuous on Hippolyta. She wrecks the Sphinx in a single impetuous order, and that's that. Elsewhere, we have the serious team that can now move out again, and they need to go and find a decent target. So with them moving out, we move around here to a point where the bot is in line of sight of the camo marker, which we know as a Caliban, and the serious team member here is able to shoot at the Ichadron with its red fury and is able to destroy the Ichadron. Unfortunately, though, I believe that this model here gets immobilized by hacking because it came in range of the Ichadron's repeater, so the Nox hacked it, and this Caliban didn't activate at all, so that's the situation we're left with. Ichadron goes down and the bot hacked. Over here, because there is a mine right next to Hippolyta, the mine wouldn't have gone off while she's in close combat because it would have affected the Sphinx, so it just doesn't go off. But if Hippolyta activates now, it will blow her up, potentially. So I had a hacker over here, an O12 hacker, who stands up and discovers that mine and then attempts to shoot it. That doesn't end up working because she fails to discover, so I jump up on top of a crate with his Varangian. The mine goes off, he actually passes the armor save, and the mine is destroyed. Hippolyta, of course, having wiped out this tag, is now able to go prone and move somewhere else, I believe, coming all the way back to her starting location, and this is going to allow her to start raking in hopefully some objective points once she adds her data pack to this particular quadrant. We now have also the Upsilon HMG standing up to fire at the mine. No, not the mine. He's standing up to shoot at something. I believe what had happened earlier is that there was a Caliban that got revealed at some point. No, that's not what's happening. No, he's just standing up really to provide arrows. Just because I know my opponent has lost his big gun, and this Upsilon is going to outrange pretty much everything and ignore camo. So it's just standing up for now to provide an arrow. Elsewhere, I believe there's some coordinated orders moving things around, so we saw a flash pulse spot on this flank over that side. I believe this Varangian is moving to take up a bit of location, and generally just a bit of shuffling going on with the group. Beta Trooper now moving out to try and discover this Caliban in the distance, and unfortunately fails that discover. We then have the flash pulse spot moving around here to go for that same discover after it had been moved into a better position. So with flash pulse spot moving around to discover, my opponent realizes he's going to get discovered eventually and chooses now to take his arrow. And the Caliban with MSV1 Spitfire, pretty good against a flash pulse spot like that. So he reveals, fires at the flash pulse spot, and actually does damage to it and actually wrecks it. So the Caliban with Spitfire is now out in the open. This gives me an opportunity to try and poke around the corner with my Sirius Trooper and shoot him close range, but unfortunately that doesn't end up working. So I end up moving the Delta into close range with the boarding shotgun, and that will mean that I'm +8 to hit, -3 for camo, hitting on something like 12s or 13s, and he'll be firing at me on a 15 with one shot. And unfortunately for me, he just cranks the 15 and crits me, and the Delta just dies, sadly. I then have to go at it with the Sirius Trooper, who pokes around the corner, goes for the blast with her Red Fury and whiffs it. He dodges closer, tries it again, and he engages into close combat, which was painful. So because he passed the engage roll, rather luckily I might add, I decided to place the model in base contact over here, which would mean that there'd be a line of sight to my Upsilon in the distance, and that would allow me to shoot into close combat. Which he does. So the Upsilon firing into close combat indiscriminately, and that kills both models. But it's more important to ruin that 40-point Caliban, which is otherwise going to be adding his points to that particular quadrant, than it is to preserve my Sirius Trooper. So I'm glad that happened, but you know, things were getting pretty desperate at that point. Now, my opponent reminded me that seed embryos do actually count their points towards zones. I'm like, ah, God. How annoying is that, right? So I'm going to have to remove this at some point too. Luckily, I'm able to get more points in that zone thanks to my troopers moving around with Hippolyta changing zones, things like that. But he is going to have the opportunity to potentially revive his guy and take the points, so that's really irritating. We have the Gangbuster now moving out to reposition the Mad Trap, and if the Gangbuster moves underneath here, hopefully that will lock down the Speculo who's still in this building, with the Mad Trap going off if the Speculo moves. Although the Speculo does have stealth, so it's only going to happen if the Speculo does something. So just setting up a position here underneath the position of the Speculo in terms of verticality. Alrighty, I think that ends up being all I can do. So it probably comes back to my opponent's turn here, where he's got very few models left, but still an opportunity to swing the game back, because at any end of every game round there's going to be more scoring. So he's carefully moving his models into various which ways. For some reason, the Speculo's standing up, moving around and trying to throw a smoke grenade because he desperately wants to be able to get his models into the correct quadrant position. And this is a brave move because throwing the smoke grenade will also trigger the Mad Trap and he won't even get to dodge it. So Mad Trap does go off, Very questionable that he does this, but again, you know, he's making a play, making a gamble. Unluckily for the Speculo, whiffs the smoke. The smoke doesn't even go down, and he fails the fizz check and gets glued in place. So terrible outcome for that Speculo. He got a little bit lucky with that Caliban earlier, but the Speculo, unfortunately, has made up for that by having a whole bunch of rotten luck. Echidron now moving out into the zone. It does have baggage, so that will be a great place for it. Over here, again showing some desperation, the paramedic Nox Trooper standing up and firing its medikit at the Caliban. Now, what happens here is amazing. The medikit goes off, hits the Caliban, passes the fizz check, Caliban gets back up off the ground, incredibly. My Varangian guard fires at the Nox Trooper from where he's positioned over on this side and gets a crit, removing him with shock ammunition. My hacker further over there also fires at him, and for some reason I looked up the profile for a Lambda and thought that it had actually missed, but the hacker would have also rolled a crit had I been paying attention. Either way, a 1 crit is enough and the Nox Trooper is destroyed, but the Caliban comes back. So there it is there. Caliban is now able to go for the corpse of that Sirius team member and power himself up. In the process, he's being shot at by a chain rifle from this Varangian here, who was the one, by the way, who actually fired at the Nox Trooper up there. The Upsilon is still in line of sight of the Caliban. So the Caliban is taking a shot from the Upsilon and the Varangian, but manages it and pulls back, and he's safe for now. Then we have the Mentor moving around, right? So the Mentor pulls into position and is in the correct zone, along with his data tracker. So he's now moving the Nox hacker data tracker into his zone. At the end of his turn, he's basically going to have 2 quadrants, and one of them is going to have the data tracker in it. Whereas on my side of the table, I've also got my 2 quadrants with my data tracker in it. So that's just going to keep the scores level for the time being. My opponent didn't tell me this at the time, and he should have, but he actually managed to complete the classified objective where you do a coup de grace on a corpse. So that actually puts him up a point that I wasn't even aware of. Either way, I still would have played the same way, right? So he's gone behind this crate, he's gone prone, this Sirius model is removed. Hippolyta's still fine over here. As the Caliban was activating, my Varangians also threw a smoke grenade to protect the position of the Gangbuster, which is also important. And that's pretty much all he can do with his turn. So I'm now moving out with my Varangian. I need to basically crush him this turn because I can't allow him to have a final turn to continue moving models around. I need to gain 2 objective points for having more quadrants controlled at the end of the game. I need to eliminate his data tracker and keep mine alive, and I need to complete my classified as well. So let's see if all that happens. So moving out around here with the Varangian initially. Then the Upsilon stands up and he's able to fire a long range at this Nox Trooper, who I believe is a forward observer. Now, I was talking earlier about the Upsilon and how the multi-sniper wasn't really quite doing it for me. Already in this game, we've seen how useful that HMG was to destroy the Caliban the first time around. Now, moving out, even though he's quite slow, the HMG just doing so much more work than a multi-sniper would. So I might continue to keep this profile on my list, to be honest. Kills the Nox Trooper, moves up further forward along that bridge, destroys the Echidron once he gets far enough along that ramp to be able to gain line of sight to him. Continues to move down here. He's able to fire at the Caliban long range. The Caliban takes a hit, fails the guts check, pulls back behind that crate. That allows Hippolyta to stand up and box him in. So no matter where he dodges to, I've got a model on either side to pick on him and finish him off. And after a few orders, the breaker rifle takes him down. And although he's still providing his points to the zone with a spawn embryo, I can just keep pummeling him with that breaker rifle and eventually killing him. Upsilon moving downstairs to this point where I'm hoping I'm actually going to be in my opponent's quadrant. That's important because I need to have a lot of points there. He's only got a couple of models left now, the Mentor and the Data Tracker Nox Hacker. So over at this stage, Varangian moving up to fire its SMG at the Speculo. Although the Speculo has been glued in place by a Mad Trap, it's still providing points, so the Varangian blasting it and killing it with some shock rounds. Then it's going to move around the side of this crate. So as we can see here, it eliminated the Speculo, moves around to this point. It will then move around the corner here, engaging these guys in close combat and basically bashing them to bits with its Berserk stick. as they attempt to dodge and shoot back at him. He does have Dogged, so their combi rifles achieve very little. The Mentor has to come out of camo, otherwise he's going to get chain rifled, so this happens, and the stick goes to work, bashing them all up. Varangian is lost due to the Dogged ability expiring, but at the end of this turn, we have all models wiped out, and it's just a matter of me putting my troopers into the correct zones, finishing off the spawn embryo, and getting into range of his HVT, which is going to allow me to swap my classified for secure the HVT. Note that we have the Gangbuster moving into his zone and the Upsilon up here, just in case he has more points worth of guys than I do, which he doesn't. I didn't need to get all 4 zones, I just did for good measure anyway. And the game basically ends there. So how do we go on points once we get to this? The Upsilon was in the correct zone over here, so that the table ends more like there. So it's the Gangbuster and Upsilon versus some corpses, basically. This is a dead. So at the end of game scoring, I have more quadrants than he does, so I get 2 points out of that. My data tracker is alive to provide that bonus point, so I get a point out of that. And he does not have his data tracker left alive, and we've both completed our classifieds. So if you add it up, in the first game round, we got to a point where he didn't have his data tracker in the zone, so he got 2 points, 2-0 to him. In the second game round, we got 1 each for both having same quadrants there, plus another 1 each for having data trackers in there. So it went to like a 4-2 to Shasvastii. Then at the end of the game, it went back up to a 6-4, I believe. No, it was 4-2 for Shasvastii. Then it went up to 4-4, because in the end of the game round, I had more objectives. Then it went up to 5-4 for me having the data tracker in there. And then 6-5 for us both having completed our classifieds each. Note that this game would have been a draw if he had just spent an additional order moving his data tracker into his quadrant after his first game round. Bearing in mind that he could have lost it later on in the game, but I think that's unlikely. So my opponent, with just a few different moves, could have easily have drawn this game, or even have just won it outright if he had done something slightly differently with his Sphinx, making it harder for me to kill it, and then just spending every turn just finishing the turn by moving the correct number of models into the correct places and just beating me. Having said that, would I have won if I'd started the game with turn 2? Well, I'm pretty sure I would have been able to defend against that Sphinx eventually. It might have been difficult, but I had a lot. I had hacking, mad traps, warbands, smoke, a lot of different things there. And it would have been quite straightforward of me to land my Delta or move my quicker troopers into the zones that he was trying to control with very few models. So not the best scenario, don't really recommend it, but I hope you guys liked this game and learned a little bit from it. Hopefully we'll be playing against this opponent with his Shasvastii some more, because they look cool and they play well, and he was a good player. See you guys again soon.